Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the MDOTM podcast, where we explore the intersection between AI, investments, and the latest trends in the industry. I'm Andrea, your host for today. Today, we'll be exploring a topic that sits right at the center of where investment management is heading: model portfolios in 2026, and what actually works at scale. Model portfolios were originally designed to simplify investing, to create consistency, efficiency, and scalability. But today, the reality is very different. Customization is accelerating, the number of model variants is multiplying, client expectations are rising, and governance and operational frameworks are under increasing pressure. So, the challenge today is no longer just about building these portfolios, it's about running them consistently and at scale. Because when personalization increases, the operational complexity increases with it. So the real question that we're going to try and answer today is, how do firms deliver this customization without breaking their operating model? To sort of unpack this, I'm joined by three guests. First of all, from MDOTM, we have Christina Viglietta, our VP of US Operations. Second, who's an external guest, we have Matt Harris, Senior Partner and Head of Wealth Management Consulting at Alpha FMC. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Kerri Heidemann, Director of Asset and Wealth Management Consulting at Alpha FMC. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
So, for context, MDOTM and Alpha FMC recently collaborated on a white paper exploring how AI is reshaping model portfolio management, and today we'll try and go beyond that theory into what firms are actually experiencing in practice. Let's get started. So, Christina, I'd like to start with you. And from your perspective and years in the industry, what has fundamentally changed in the way firms need to design and run their portfolio management architecture?
Sure, and thanks for the wonderful introduction, Andre, and it's great to see both of you. A lot of these conversations we've had one-off, so excited to do it here. So I started my career in 2010 at a large asset manager, and when you think back to that time, what is it, almost 20 years ago, there were two common challenges that the industry faced. The first one was in data and data availability. And then the second one was in personalization. There wasn't demand for it, but there was also limited options for that. So when we thought about a traditional asset allocation, it was through the target date fund. That was like the newest innovation. You had ETFs that were this new emerging asset class vehicle. No one really exactly knew how they fit within the spectrum. And really, most clients could deal with a simple portfolio with a U.S. equity exposure, fixed income exposure, and then international equity exposure. If we fast forward to today, just like everything else in the world, technology has accelerated the rate of data that's available, where actually it's become a problem. And one of my favorite stats always just blows my mind is 90% of the data that's in the world today has been created over the past 2 years. So
wow.
With the first time I heard that, I had to fact check it.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I was like, and it's from Microsoft, so I'll cite that it's a reputable source. And then, so our challenge is, how do you cut through the noise with that? And then also, we've seen a lot of evolution in our industry as it relates to customization. So we're not just customizing when it comes to different types of funds. It's different types of funds, different types of vehicles, from ETFs to SMAs to direct indexing to the democratization of assets such as in private credits, alternatives. And now advisors and clients are faced with this paradox of choice, where advisors, which funds do I pick? Which vehicles do I pick for my clients? And how do I really personalize based upon what I know their needs are? And that is where I think there's a great opportunity for AI to help asset managers really differentiate their offering, and for advisors to really leverage to curate a menu of options for their clients that best fit their needs.
I think what's interesting about what you're saying, Christina, to kind of put it in the context of what we're seeing both with the wealth management clients we work with, as well as the asset managers who support them through model portfolios, managed accounts, what have you, is kind of alongside the, call it technical evolution of having the capability to now deliver truly customizable experiences at scale. And we can kind of dive into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. You talk there on the supply side of the equation, but on the other side, on the demand side of the equation, you also have more and more advisors and wealth managers looking to adopt model portfolios and kind of getting out of the business of stock picking and those types of things. And I think everywhere from the different sources you can look at, from 50 to 80% of advisors now admit to using models. And I say admit intentionally because I think sometimes the number is higher. A lot of firms or a lot of advisors, might just not want to say that out loud. But now the question becomes, how can I still prove demonstrable value to my client in comparison to the competitor down the street if we're both using the same models, right? And I think that's where this conversation becomes a little bit more interesting, as advisors kind of demand now the ability to customize those model portfolio solutions from their asset management partners. And I think this is where the intersection of the demand side equation that I was just explaining and the supply side capability that you were alluding to with the advent of AI and portfolio solutions to be able to do this kind of come together.
Kerri, you work hands-on, with these firms that Matt was talking about, that they're trying to implement these solutions in order to address the changes that Christina was talking about. From an implementation standpoint, where do you think that firms struggle the most when integrating this new technology and scaling model portfolios? Would you say it's data, systems, governance, culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before we dive into that, I think helpful to just frame up what we mean by customization here, because sometimes it's not all that custom. Oftentimes, to Matt's point, an advisor is going to their asset management partner and saying, hey, I love this suite of models, but I want to embed some of my thinking. I want to switch some investment vehicles. So instead of ETFs, I have SMAs for tax strategies. Or I want to embed some alts exposure. Or I want to throw in some third-party funds because I want to show that there's a level of independence between the asset manager and what I provide to my client. And I think that change from customization being something brand new every single time to it being more of something that you tweak is what's changing how folks are looking at their operating model. Because now they're looking at their operating model and saying, oh, I actually need new capabilities that I didn't have before. So for example, just being able to construct it, taking that existing off-the-shelf model and making those tweaks in an easy, scalable way. In the past, that's something folks might do on paper, just developing paper models. But now we see folks wanting to do it in a more scalable way and looking to their technology tools and processes to do so. So not only do they need these pieces in their operating model to build these models, but they need to monitor tracking error between that kind of core off-the-shelf model and that custom model that they're developing. They need to manage the lineage between these two. So when you change that core model, it flows down and cascades to all these various custom models. So it's leaving a lot of model providers and asset managers in a space where they're saying, okay, well, what do I have in my operating model today? And what do I need in the future that I don't have to do this customization at scale? And that's when they're starting to see, okay, there's a gap here that I need to fill across the skill sets and the people building these models, across the processes that I have for approving these models and getting them out to clients, and the technology and data that underpins them.
I think that gap, Kerri, that you just alluded to is kind of often where we enter the conversation with our clients, because when clients have an existing model portfolio business, I think oftentimes they probably tripped into creating a few bespoke custom model solutions for their largest distribution partners and wealth sponsors that they work with. But when they really want to scale that effort, doing that in a very bespoke way each time erodes the economics of the whole deal. So kind of thinking through, to your point, Kerri, like, where are their actual capability and service gaps as well, and our ability to create, distribute, and service an increasing number of model portfolios to an increasing number of wealth managers and sponsors out there. That's where the real kind of challenge lies.
And it's great that you mentioned that, because I think our relationship has been imperative as informing the evolution of our product at M.M, where we initially started out as using AI for quantitative investing. And over time, we were seeing both with our clients and through conversations that we've had with individuals in the industry like you that the true problem lies in the gap between you have a centralized place where you might keep your core models, or you might keep like a core set of references, different asset allocations, and then you have the downstream impact of distribution, and you put it nicely, and in the middle you see this, I call it spreadsheet Jenga. I don't know, I was trying to think of a fun term where there's
Trademark pending.
there's thank you. There's a fragmented area that's so difficult to solve because it takes a lot of data to be able to process the ability to customize across all the different levers, Kerri, that you mentioned. It's first, we talked about this actually in one of our calls, is if you are using your core platform for 10 models and then you're scaling that into, say, I don't know, 50. That might even be too high, like custom portfolios. That might work, but it's then starts to break down as you create these models. You then adapt them for constraints, preferences, and then you have to track, store, distributes. Every time you make a change, how does that flow through? And if you think about the math behind that, if you have 10 portfolios and say 100 different custom models, that's not just 100 different variables that the asset manager has to go through. That starts to get into the thousands of different variables, because then how do they intersect with each other, which starts to become very computationally challenging, a lot more than traditional optimization processes or even core platforms were built to handle, because that isn't the challenge that they're trying to solve. So that's at least something when we think about the evolution of our product, like how do we help to solve that problem with some of the capabilities that we've been building across the years.
And I think, Andrea, going back to kind of your point in terms of where some of the biggest challenges lie, I think we all kind of living and breathing this can go into some of like the technical details that we're discussing right now, but there's a real change management aspect of this as well, because a lot of times you're walking into organizations that have had a very successful models business for years and years with a very long track record. And I think the first step is understanding that to really scale a custom model solution, sometimes you can't just build on top of that infrastructure and on top of that operating model. And it requires almost a whole redesign and kind of thinking about that net new.
If complexity is compounding, as you all mentioned, even from the data that Christina was talking about, the change management that Matt just mentioned, if this complexity is sort of compounding, and these traditional platforms weren't designed for this level of interaction, I'd like to go a little bit more vertically on the aspect about AI, not really as a buzzword, but more as an operational tool, which was what Christina was mentioning earlier. How initially, the conversation started around data and research regarding AI. But you recently mentioned, you're describing something different, more AI as a workflow orchestration, used for scalability, used for connecting all these different processes. Where exactly is AI delivering that measurable value today?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I know, Kerri, this is something we chat about quite often, because I think the fortunate or unfortunate, if that works in this scenario, reality here is that the kind of biggest use case for AI is probably on some of like the boring stuff, quote unquote, that people might not even think about when building a custom models offer. There's the whole, how do we develop investment solutions? But then there's kind of what I like to call the surround sound around the side of that, in terms of how do you manage and service these types of things. And I know that's where we're seeing a lot of firms think about using these types of capabilities.
Yeah, a good example we can jump into there is oftentimes in these kind of custom models, they often rely on that reference model commentary, right? Because if you think about it, commentary is traditionally something that's pretty manual, something that you have to write around what you're seeing in the market and how that applies to the model. What we're seeing now, though, is folks are saying, okay, customization isn't just in the strategy, but it's in all the ways we service that model. So how can we use AI to embed more customization in that? And a key one we're seeing a lot of folks explore, but maybe not necessarily have widespread adoption yet, is embedding AI commentary to say, how can I actually tweak what you say about that core model so it's actually custom for my end advisor, so that they can have more informed client conversations with their clients.
And I love that. I feel like you teed me up perfectly in the sense that this is something that we think a lot about as well. So to your point about workflows, like using AI in the workflows, just that one way that we use it is one, processing power, because the typical optimization models are limited. Two is in the storytelling. And because I actually had this happen to me yesterday. I was at a conference and it was with asset managers, so chief investment officers, and they were all talking about the new products that they were creating. And the one gentleman sitting next to me says, we have finally figured out this suite of active ETFs that like generates a lot of alpha, and we're very happy with it because this is going to provide a lot of value to clients. And I turned to him and I said, how are you communicating that externally? Like that's great. Like given that there's so many options. And he goes, that is a challenge that we're struggling to figure out. And so to your point, Kerri, I think being able to use AI, and especially as we continue to evolve in different types of AI, from generative to stepping into agentic, I think applying that to the customized commentary and reporting process is a layer of servicing that helps you get your messaging out there better as the asset manager, but also provides like another tier of high quality service. So it's not just in the customized models themselves. It's being able to let the advisor take that to their end clients and say, well, this is what's in your portfolio. This is why. This is what's changing over time. That's tends to be very manual, but now we have these great tools to be able to prompt, say, an LLM to generate that in a scaled manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to Matt's point that these advisors aren't just looking for models for the strategy or the thinking around it, because they have a lot of that and they want to partner on that. But they also want all the ways models help scale their business, right? That's sending them to execution platforms so that they can easily implement them in their clients' portfolios. They can do tax transition analysis. They can, to your point, have tools, commentary, materials that they can have these conversations with their end clients without needing to do all of that work themselves.
And I think building on that, Kerri, like at the end of the day, if I'm an advisor, I have more choice than ever, right? Yep. The shelf space is crowded. And in fact, a lot of platforms are trying to now make shelf space smaller, and they're picking a few partners that they want to keep on. But if I'm an advisor, I'm going to go with the suite or solutions that allow me to show the most demonstrable value to my end clients. So how can you help me look better and get better outcomes for my end clients? And I think that's really where we're seeing the investment on the asset management side of the business here, is all those other kind of service components that Kerri alluded to. It's not just about providing the kind of solution or the model itself. It's about actually helping that advisor deliver better outcomes for their end clients. And the more you can do that from a service component, Kerri, you mentioned some of the tech component as well. That's where we're seeing flows really go.
And Matt, I think it's not only about, making the asset wealth manager look better, but maybe, in your opinion, even as a leadership perspective, it is like this explainability becoming part of like an overall responsibility. Like, it's sort of like becoming a standard. It's no longer about looking good to your client, but it's sort of becoming a requirement to have that explainability behind investment decisions, right?
100%, and probably look better didn't do justice to the actual kind of intent of delivering better outcomes for end clients. But 100%, Andrea, I think, at the end of the day, there is a real conversation around, if I'm a provider of models, I'm kind of one step removed from the actual client advisor conversation and implementation of those models. So I think what you're hitting on, Andrea, is like, what is the actual fiduciary duty of the model provider in that equation versus the advisor in that scenario? And I think, to your point, our asset management clients take that, even though they might not be the direct fiduciary in that relationship, they take that responsibility very seriously in terms of making sure we're not just allowing you to customize anything you want. We're going to have very tight guardrails around that, because we still need to be able to stand behind the investment objective, and that needs to be in line with our organizational values, our investment philosophy, et cetera. So couldn't agree more. I think there's almost multiple layers of checks and balances in this equation, because you have the asset manager who's ensuring they have the right guardrails on this, and then you obviously have the advisor on the other end who's ensuring that it's implemented in an efficient manner.
I have a question.
And Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. So it's funny. I've been thinking you are the advisors to asset managers and advisors, which I don't know, you made me laugh. You can cut that. But when you look at this challenge that we're seeing, it's like the connectivity challenge of going from one to many, and the opportunity for AI to help solve that, and then like the servicing piece. What do you look for in terms of a solution? Meaning like the type of solution, whether it be build internally versus like partner with a external vendor, product provider. Like what to you like stands out in the industry as really important?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that folks can approach this. I think the key part is just knowing what gaps you need to fill, right? Because that could be something that could be enhancing an existing system, or maybe the gap is big enough that you do have to go out and look at vendor partners for it. I think all firms are kind of at a different, let's say, level of evolution here. So the key part is just, looking at, okay, what will I need in this future, in this world where I have a very high volume of models that I need to build, manage, service? What are the gaps, and do I have the right tool sets to fill that? And if so, that's great, and we can build on them. If not, we need to look to partners out there who can help accelerate that and build that at a faster pace.
Yeah, and I think part of our job in that advisory scenario that you outlined, Christina, is not just thinking about the problem set that they're trying to solution for today, but it's kind of looking at market dynamics and trends and needing to anticipate how you have to build a future-proof solution, for lack of a better term, to ensure that this business will scale tomorrow, right? And I think that's where, to Kerri's point, some of the harder conversations can come in when perhaps there's a legacy piece of proprietary technology that a firm has built, and their business in this space is wrapped around that. Sometimes those might break when you start to throw in some of the things you mentioned, like adding SMAs into your models, or starting to look at how we can incorporate alternative exposure, et cetera. So I think it's really understanding first kind of where they're at and where they're going, but then also navigating some of those tricky kind of trade-offs and conversations, and really understanding if you're going to grow and be competitive in this space, well, here's how you kind of need to start thinking about that.
Yeah. And there's an interesting piece here on how this also flows with the rest of your operating model, your other offerings, right? Like we have a lot of conversations about adding SMAs in model portfolios, and especially manager traded SMAs, and how you have to think about connecting those two operating models, which can be difficult when you have legacy tools.
You're hitting on one of my favorite topics, Kerri, which is the convergence in our clients' organizations. Historically, they might have a model portfolio business, a managed account business. These things are very separate, very discrete. But there's really a convergence of these two kind of business lines, particularly when you start to think about, to your point, Kerri, embedding managed accounts within a model portfolio. And given the kind of economics in these offers are challenging for asset managers to build profitable businesses around, you have to look at where you can get kind of shared capability across these different service lines. And so we're having a lot of conversations with clients, not just looking at one or the other side of this equation, but really starting to think about, what is your offer to the wealth management community from a product standpoint, from a solution standpoint, from a technology standpoint, because sometimes firms are sponsoring that tech that advisors are actually using, as well as from a service standpoint. So it's really revisiting this whole kind of business strategy, if you will, in terms of how you're adding value to those wealth managers you work with.
I love that. And two things I heard from both of you are flexibility, like specifically to your point, if you have a lot of different disparate products or businesses that are now, you want to put in custom models or like consolidate into a single offering, you have to have flexibility or flexible technology that enables you to be able to do that, where when you build that, there's a lot of different considerations that go into it. It's like, what is the underlying structure? What are the different constraints? Like, oh, how can I like if someone prefers some sort of tax preferential treatment, if someone prefers an ESG overlay, how do I incorporate values? And to actually execute on that is very difficult unless you set the system up to solve the problem in the right way. And I know that's something that I think about a lot when I'm trying to learn about different tools and technology myself, is what was this tool designed for? And is it trying to adapt from where its core design is, or is it trying to design to solve the problem, which is having greater flexibility to customize, consolidate different types of lines and accounts, and then also be able to communicate that back to our point, but communicate it in terms of like, what does the platform look like itself? Because UX is important too.
Yeah, totally. And sorry, Andrea, please.
Oh, no, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, and I think taking a step back, we've talked a lot on like, call it the operating platform or the technology challenges. But I do think it's worth revisiting some of those change management pieces, because Kerri and I talk a lot about this isn't just one group within an organization that you need to get on the same page in terms of the strategy around this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think of it from the client's point of view, the wealth manager, they want to have an integrating experience from the minute you start that sales conversation and start talking about what kind of preferences you want, through to how you build that model and work with model strategists, through to how it's delivered and then serviced. And if you have, to your point, various operating models, various different groups that aren't aligned there, that's creating a disjointed experience for your end client or for your advisors and your wealth managers. And so we see a lot of firms, they can't tackle this in chunks. They have to look at the end-to-end value chain here to make sure it's a truly integrated experience across the path.
And to be blunt on that, getting investment professionals, marketing professionals, operations professionals, and technology professionals all on the same page around kind of the strategy here is a challenge internally for organizations, right? So I think a lot of times, to your point, Kerri, step one is really aligning on the strategy and kind of all the different, call it organizational groups that are involved in this process before making any type of decision on their operating model or their technology choices. And unfortunately, that's where we see this go wrong sometimes, is people rush into some of these decisions, or it's sponsored by one part of their organization without bringing all those other groups along for that journey.
Yeah. That is something. So when I ask our team, how were we successful with some of our clients? Like, how did we approach? Like, what do we do for them? And what I've learned is similar to what you just phrased so eloquently is we recommend that a firm have 5 to 7 key priorities as it comes to technology or AI in this process. Really understanding like what are the problems we're trying to solve, and then champion those from the top, but also hear from different stakeholders, because a lot of the times like having that champion at the top only goes so far if you're not the one using it every single day. So how do you figure out like we want to, like in our case, like it's like we want to use MDOTM because we want to use it for helping to scale our model portfolios. That is something we know is one of our strategic priorities, which you may have helped them figure that out. But we also want to hear from the users too, to make sure like when we're implementing and understanding the business that we're doing it in a way that the user says, yes, this solves my problem and it does it well. And being able to do that in a way that keeps those voices consistent, I think for us when we work with some of our clients has been the best way to achieve success. But it's hard. Yep. So to your point.
Yeah. And go ahead, Andrea.
Oh, sorry. I wanted, as a follow-up to Christina, you mentioned all the steps in order to integrate that technology. Once integrated, how would you measure the efficiency of, let's say, the technology integrated correctly? Is it just an efficiency tool, or does it have like any measurable values that you can take away from this integration?
Yeah, and I'm sure you think about this a lot as well, but when I think of AI, it's easy to quantify things such as number of hours saved, even FTE consolidation. But really, I think the true value is how did this enable growth, whether it's expanding the investable universe, expanding the level of customization that could occur because of the processing power and the non-linear element that AI can capture to incorporate those different constraints, to not just saving time, but like what type of energy does that give investment professionals to focus on what they do best, which is making better investment decisions. So when we think about the value that at least we try to bring as an AI-based provider, we try to think of that in terms of those terms, that this is not just a cost savings metric or something that you have to do because everyone's doing it, but it really can help it can help your growth, like top line growth, exponentially, and really transform the way your business looks.
Yeah. And there's a client experience angle to that too, right? We have a lot of conversations where, in the past when you had one-off customization opportunities, you could go through the existing processes. But oftentimes that was a lengthy cycle. That was a lot of iterating on a model with a client. That was a lot of going through investment committee approvals, setting it up in platforms, getting the servicing ready, right? Making custom reports, what have you. And now clients don't want to go through that lengthy process anymore, right? They want to shorten it, which I think is a key piece where AI can come in.
And, I think maybe to kind of bring it back to a real kind of ROI conversation and how, when we think about a manager that might be rolling out a custom model portfolio offer, how are they actually thinking about the economics of that? Because these are free, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, right? So asset managers are not necessarily charging to build and deliver model portfolios or custom model portfolios. They're reliant on the fees that they're getting from investments in the constituents that make up those different strategies, right? Whether those are ETFs, whether those are mutual funds or SMAs. When you think about it like that, there becomes a more formulaic approach to figuring out what is the minimum kind of asset threshold that I need in this deal or in this pursuit to justify doing everything that we've been chatting about to build, manage, and service that custom model portfolio. So when you find areas like generating custom commentary, these types of things where in a prior world, you know how many hours that took marketing professionals to be able to do that, you can now start to put pieces together around what the actual kind of underlying cost is per solution, and then come up with a clear ROI in terms of what adopting new or potentially augmenting existing technology will bring to the organization.
That's a great example.
So, sort of to wrap up today's conversation, we've talked about the challenges, how to approach this integration, even as to how to quantify the benefits. I would like to leave as a final question or, thought for our listeners. What would be your advice to them in order to approach this new integration? I know you talked about as to how to address that gap, but maybe one of the first questions that we have from clients is, what is step one? How can I approach this completely new technology? Because you guys talked about all of these series of problems of like change management, team alignment, and legacy systems. What would be step one in order to approach the integration of this new technology in order to streamline the process?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I think step one, and we've kind of been alluding to it, is having a very clear view of what your offer is, right? And that's where, Matt, you mentioned getting quite formulaic with it, having a view on not only what are the customizations that I want to offer and what are the guardrails that I want to employ to make this scalable, but also meet the needs of my clients. There's also, what is my servicing standards, right? What is that level of servicing that I want to do? What is my delivery? Is that just delivering to client platforms? Is that partnering with implementation partners? Once you have this view of what this offer is and how it's going to scale, then you have a clear view of what technology you're going to need, what skill sets and people you're going to need, processes, and ultimately the data underneath it.
Stole my answer. So I'll kind of think on my feet. But, if I think about the who in this question, right, there's probably two distinct groups. We either have, call it fairly mature or sophisticated home offices at some of the larger wealth managers, or we're talking to kind of the traditional asset management community who are the kind of, call it, historical providers of model portfolios. I think to get to your question, Andrea, adopting or integrating the technology almost assumes that we already know what our strategy is. So kind of building on Kerri's point, I think step one is really figuring out not just what that strategy is, but then decomposing that into, where do we have existing strengths from an organization? Let's say we're an asset manager. What sales channels are we strong on? And what is that community even demanding from us? Because that could change how much I'm willing to invest or not in adopting new tools and those types of things. So I think step one is really getting crystal clear on not just the product strategy itself, but really who your target clients are. It's different if you're a home office, different if you're an asset manager, et cetera. And then from there, it really comes down to a lot of the conversation we had. You have to demonstrate a clear ROI. So once you can justify the economics of bringing the tool in-house, I think that's where the kind of rubber meets the road from like a design standpoint, integrating into the different solutions and those types of things. But I almost view that as like step 2 or 3 down the road in terms of doing this successfully, just because we've seen examples where firms run too fast down one track, and it might ultimately be the right decision, but they didn't take the necessary precursor steps to ensure that their both organization, operations, and technology were in a point to adopt that new technology.
It's hard going last because I think we've, when you say first, I think we're on step 3 now. But the first thing that came to mind for me was know your bench, and you both addressed that. And I think it sounds simple. That's an important in life that if you know your strategy, what you're going to do, you know what your client needs, and you can measure the ROI on that, then who are the people that you have, or what, and then who are the people you may need, and what does that look like then? So do you hire, do you partner, do you build internally completely with your current resources?
But I think you do hit on an interesting point, Christina, there that we haven't really chatted about, which is approaching the decision with an open mind. Yeah. Like, because a lot of times change is very emotional, right? Like some existing platforms or processes have been embedded within an organization for so long. And when you start to talk about changing that, that's not just a technology change. That's not just a business strategy change. Like, there's a real emotional kind of response that you have to navigate there. And so I think it's ensuring that you're approaching these types of transformations or types of questions that you're alluding to with an open mind, and being willing to adapt and being willing to adopt and take on new capabilities. So that's also something that we encounter quite a bit, and it sounds a bit superfluous and like, oh yes, there's always change management, this, that, and the other, but it's a real thing.
Yeah, I think absolutely you hit this. We see this all the time. We see, some firms who say, we're just going to go out and learn and approach it from that. And, they put up a custom models webpage and they see what comes in, and that has challenges because sometimes their operating models aren't built for scale. But on the flip side, we see firms trying to really, really perfect what they have before they want to take it out to the market. And to Matt's point, you need feedback to iterate on that. So there's probably a balance in between here of what works best, but still allows you to iterate on what you have.
Perfect. I think this is actually a great place to wrap up today's conversation. So thank you so much, Matt, Christina, and Kerri. And well, definitely portfolio management in 2026 is basically an operating model challenge. So investment views are not enough. Like, firms have to translate those views into outcomes that are consistent and scalable and explainable as well. And definitely AI is not replacing investment expertise. It is redefining how that expertise is delivered at scale. So thank you again, Christina, Matt, Kerri, for an incredibly thoughtful discussion. And thank your viewers or listeners for joining us on Beyond the Noise. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.